What Elcom TMY say NL bar AM decoded. Today we're cutting straight to the point. How to enhance your performance and accelerate learning by applying a growth mindset. Not as a motivational slogan, but as a precise, actionable practice grounded in how the brain actually changes. Let me start with a single, unavoidable truth. The way you interpret struggle determines what you do next. When your brain tags a mistake as proof you can't do it, you shut down effort and exploration. When it tags that same mistake as information, a clue about what to change, you update strategies, try again, and the brain rewires. This reframing is the essence of a growth mindset. Errors are data, not destiny. When you look closely at the moments when learning actually happens, you'll notice something counterintuitive. It rarely occurs when everything is going smoothly. The real change, the kind that transforms a skill from unfamiliar to automatic, tends to arise from friction. And friction almost always shows up in the form of mistakes. A growth mindset begins with this recognition. Mistakes are not verdicts, they are signals. They are not markers of ability, but markers of opportunity, pointing directly toward the adjustments your brain needs to make next. When you make an error, a very specific set of neural events unfolds. There's a rapid spike in activity in the anterior cingulate cortex, an area that detects conflict between what you expected to happen and what actually happened. That detection mechanism is not there to shame you or punish you. It exists to highlight the precise moment your brain should pay more attention. It's a biological highlighter pen. If you label the mistake as failure, you shut down the learning cycle. But if you treat the mistake as data, information about the mismatch, you allow the next stage to unfold. On strategic updating. This is the essence of a growth mindset. It is not about telling yourself feel-good stories. It is about shaping how your brain interprets its own signals. When the interpretation shifts from, I'm not good at this, to, there's something useful here, you shift from defensive mode to adaptive mode. Defensive mode causes you to retreat, to repeat comfortable patterns, to protect your sense of competence. Adaptive mode engages curiosity, experimentation, and the willingness to take another swing at the problem in front of you. That shift, that single cognitive pivot, determines whether your brain will strengthen old circuits or build new ones. Learning thrives in states of slight instability. Not so much instability that you feel overwhelmed, but just enough to create a prediction error. A moment where your brain realizes its current model of the skill isn't fully accurate. Mistakes are the raw material for that realization. Each error hands your brain a precise clue. Here's where your assumptions broke down. When you view mistakes as information, you effectively widen the space in which learning can occur. You allow yourself to sit in the moment between what failed and what could be updated, and that moment is where neuroplasticity is most accessible. But this only works if you stay engaged long enough for the brain to run its internal correction algorithms. Many people experience a mistake, feel frustration, and immediately withdraw. Frustration isn't the enemy. It's actually the sign that the brain is primed to reorganize. If you can stay with that sensation, breathe through it, and return to the task with the intention to adjust something specific, you convert an emotional signal into a biological opportunity. The difference between people who improve rapidly and people who plateau often comes down to how they respond in those 10 to 30 seconds after something goes wrong. Treating mistakes as information does two powerful things. First, it shifts your attention away from self-judgment and toward the mechanics of the mistake. Instead of thinking, I'm bad at this, you're thinking, what exactly broke down? That question sharpens perception. It trains your brain to scan for relevant details, not narratives. Second, it primes you to change strategies. Real improvement is almost never a matter of simply trying harder. It's a matter of trying differently. When you view errors as data, you automatically open the door to new strategies because the error tells you which part of the strategy needs updating. You can speed up this entire process by making the reflection explicit. When you make a mistake, pause and describe it in 1 or 2 sentences, what you attempted, what outcome you expected, what actually happened, and one hypothesis about why. That simple exercise forces your brain to articulate the information embedded in the error. It's like taking a raw signal and converting it into a clean, analyzable form. Once you've done that, your next attempt becomes an experiment instead of a repetition. You're no longer just hoping the next try will magically work. You're testing an adjustment based on the information your previous error provided. Over time, this practice builds a feedback, rich learning loop. Attempt, error, reflect, adjust, reattempt. The more iterations you run, the more your brain tunes the correct circuits. Mistakes stop feeling like threats and start feeling like calibration points. And as calibration accumulates, you experience something remarkable: the rapid acceleration that happens when your brain finally locks onto the right pattern. This is why a growth mindset isn't motivational language. It's a learning strategy rooted in how the nervous system works. When you interpret mistakes as information, you're not being optimistic. You're being biologically accurate. You're aligning your perception with the actual mechanisms of plasticity. And once that alignment is in place, improvement stops being a question of talent and starts being a question of iteration. The idea that the brain is plastic across the entire lifespan is not just an inspiring concept. It's a biological fact with enormous implications for how we approach learning, skill development, emotional regulation, and even identity. Plasticity simply means the brain can modify its connections, strengthen some circuits, weaken others, and build entirely new patterns of activity in response to experience. It was once believed that this capacity belonged only to childhood, that after adolescence the brain settled into a fixed state. What we now understand is that while plasticity does change as we age, it never disappears. The adult brain, the aging brain, even the brain recovering from injury, retains the ability to adapt, provided it receives the right signals. Plasticity is essentially the nervous system's ability to reshape itself in response to demand. When you learn something new, a language, a movement pattern, a cognitive skill, your brain undergoes tiny shifts in how neurons fire together. Initially, these shifts are unstable, new circuits are weak, noisy, and easily disrupted. But with repeated engagement, especially under conditions that require focus and effort, those circuits begin to stabilize. Synapses strengthen, myelin thickens around axons, and neural pathways become more efficient. This process does not rely on age, it relies on engagement, repetition, and feedback. One of the most important things to understand about lifelong plasticity is that it operates on a use-dependent system. Circuits that get used more often get stronger. Circuits that are ignored weaken. This principle applies whether you are 12, 40, or 70. The key variable is not the age of the brain, but the level of attention and intensity you bring to the activity. Deep focus followed by periods of rest is the recipe that signals your brain to change itself. Attention marks the moments your brain should take seriously. Rest is where consolidation happens. Of course, the profile of plasticity does shift over time. In childhood, the brain is highly malleable because many circuits are still forming. Kids don't need as much deliberate focus to acquire certain skills. The brain is already in a hyperplastic state. Adults, on the other hand, must generate the conditions for plasticity more intentionally. That usually means engaging systems of alertness, not stress or panic, but the kind of heightened engagement that comes with taking on a challenge that sits at the edge of your ability. This slight increase in adrenaline and acetylcholine amplifies the brain's ability to reshape circuits. It's why learning something new feels effortful. Effort is part of the biological trigger, but effort alone isn't enough. Adults must also use timing strategically. Short, high, quality bouts of learning, 20 to 90 minutes depending on the task, followed by sleep or even brief rest periods, dramatically enhance retention. Sleep in particular is where your brain revisits the patterns you practiced, replaying them and strengthening the connections. If attention is the signal that marks what matters, sleep is the stage where those signals become structure. Another critical aspect of adult plasticity is emotional relevance. When something matters to you, when there's meaning, urgency, or personal importance attached, the brain tags the experience for deeper encoding. This is why adults often learn fastest when the skill is directly connected to a goal, improving at work, mastering a physical technique, managing stress, or connecting better with others. Motivation fuels focus, and focus fuels plasticity. It's also true that the adult brain carries more stubborn circuits, patterns built through years of repetition. That can feel like resistance to change, but it's simply a sign of well-established pathways. To overwrite those pathways, you must create conditions where old patterns fail and new ones are required. This is where deliberate discomfort comes in. Placing yourself into scenarios where the old strategy no longer works forces the brain to encode a new one. Adults who learn quickly aren't necessarily more talented. They are more willing to enter the zone where mistakes happen because they understand that plasticity is activated there. The aging brain retains the capacity to change as well. In fact, research consistently shows that older adults who continue learning Languages, physical skills, memory tasks, instruments preserve cognitive function far better than those who do not. Novelty is a strong driver of plasticity. When the brain encounters something unfamiliar, it allocates new resources, forms new pathways, and integrates new patterns. There is no point on the timeline where this capacity disappears. It may slow, but it remains accessible. What you do repeatedly becomes who you are neurologically. Every skill you decide to build, every habit you reinforce, every emotional pattern you challenge, all of it leaves a structural trace. The brain across the lifespan is a reflection of choices, not just biology. Plasticity gives you the power to shape those choices into long-term capability. If you engage deeply, practice deliberately, and rest strategically, your brain will continue to rewire itself, whether you're learning your first skill or your 50th. That is the promise of lifelong plasticity. You are never done becoming. Mindset alone isn't a magic bullet, and understanding why is essential if you want real, measurable improvement in any skill or behavior. A mindset, growth-oriented or otherwise, is simply a cognitive frame, a lens through which you interpret effort, mistakes, and challenge. That lens can either open the door to learning or close it, but it cannot walk you through the door. Belief provides direction, but behavior provides movement. Without the right actions, mindset becomes an empty promise. With the right actions, it becomes a powerful amplifier of learning and performance. When people talk about mindset, they often imagine it as a switch. Flip it on, and suddenly progress becomes easier, obstacles shrink, and motivation appears on command. But the brain doesn't work this way. Neuroplasticity, the actual biological basis of learning, is driven by specific conditions. Focused attention, deliberate practice, errors followed by adjustments, and rest for consolidation. Mindset influences whether you are willing to enter those conditions, but it cannot replace them. You can tell yourself, I can improve all day, but unless you engage with tasks that stretch your ability, generate prediction errors, and demand strategy changes, your brain has no reason to rewire. A more accurate way to understand mindset is as a gate that determines whether you stay in the learning process long enough for the real mechanisms of plasticity to take effect. PANS. If your mindset is fixed, you interpret difficulty as a threat, a sign that you've reached the limit of your ability. In that state, focus becomes scattered, effort declines, and frustration quickly turns into avoidance. If your mindset is growth-oriented, difficulty becomes feedback, not failure. You stay engaged longer. You test strategies instead of abandoning the task. You start to treat the discomfort of learning as a signal that you're in the right zone. But none of it, substitutes for the work itself. The nervous system remodels itself through action, not intention. Wanting to improve isn't enough. What triggers neuroplastic change are the moments when a task forces your brain to confront a mismatch between what it predicted and what actually happened. That mismatch, the error signal, is the spark, but the follow-up action is the fuel. When you analyze the mistake, adjust your strategy, and try again, you give your brain the repeated, targeted experiences that strengthen useful circuits and weaken ineffective ones. Mindset helps you tolerate the error. Behavior turns the error into learning. This is why two people with identical beliefs about growth can have completely different outcomes. One might believe strongly in the ability to improve, but never enter the kind of training that actually reshapes neural pathways. They stay in low challenge environments, avoid mistakes, or repeat the same strategy without refinement. The brain registers no need to change. Another person with the same mindset might deliberately choose tasks that are just beyond their current ability, seek out corrective feedback, and reflect intentionally after each attempt. Their brain receives continuous evidence that adaptation is required. Over time, these micro adjustments accumulate into significant improvement. The difference isn't mindset, it's method. A common misunderstanding is that mindset is supposed to generate motivation that makes effort feel easy. But effort in the context of learning is not supposed to feel easy. Effort engages neuromodulators, acetylcholine, dopamine, norepinephrine, that mark experiences as important and drive synaptic change. The strain, the friction, the slight frustration you feel when grappling with something difficult is evidence that the right chemicals are being released. A growth mindset helps you stay calm enough to work inside that friction. But the friction itself is necessary for the brain to reorganize. It's also important to understand that environments and tools matter. You can have a deeply growth-oriented mindset, but if you lack clear goals, structure, or effective practice strategies, your progress will be inconsistent. Plasticity is competitive. Circuits that are activated efficiently get reinforced while others fade. If your practice is unstructured, your attention scattered, or your feedback loop absent, your brain will strengthen whatever pattern it is exposed to, even if that pattern is distraction or inefficiency. A growth mindset doesn't protect you from poor technique. It simply keeps you willing to improve it. The real power emerges when mindset and method work together. Mindset keeps you engaged, method gives your brain the stimulus it needs, and repetition consolidates the change. This trio, belief, behavior, and biology, is what drives lasting improvement. Remove any one of them and the system collapses. Keep all three aligned and the brain becomes a machine for refinement. So, mindset is not the magic bullet. It's the ignition. The fuel is deliberate practice. The engine is neuroplasticity. And the driver is you showing up repeatedly, embracing challenge, adjusting strategies, and giving your brain the signal, this matters, change for this. Practical levers you can use immediately are the tools that convert a growth mindset from an idea into measurable neural change. They don't rely on motivation, personality, or natural talent. They rely on creating the precise conditions the brain needs in order to update its circuitry. These levers work because they tap into how neuroplasticity actually unfolds through focused attention, error strategy adjustments, feedback, and rest. When used deliberately, they accelerate learning in a way that is noticeable within days and transformative over weeks. The first lever is relabeling mistakes as diagnostic data. This sounds simple, but it's one of the most potent ways to shift your brain into a plastic state. When you make an error, there's an immediate spike in neural activity designed to highlight the mismatch between what you expected and what happened. If you respond with frustration or self-criticism, you suppress the very signals that mark the learning moment. But if you pause and say, "This is information," you widen the window in which your brain can modify existing connections. One practical way to do this is to capture each mistake with a single sentence describing what you attempted and what actually occurred. That act alone removes emotional noise and extracts the useful signal. The second lever is setting process-based goals. Outcome goals, getting an A, mastering a move, hitting a number, can be motivating, but they're too distant to trigger the moment-to-moment adjustments the brain requires. Process goals are specific behaviors under your control, completing 2 focused practice blocks, applying a new technique, seeking feedback, or increasing difficulty marginally. The brain responds far more effectively to signals of consistent behavior than to abstract achievements. When you focus on the process, you reduce anxiety, maintain attention, and give your brain the repetition it needs to encode patterns. Another powerful lever is metacognition, the habit of reflecting on your strategies. Reflection is not a luxury, it's a biological amplifier. After a learning session, take 2 to 3 minutes to ask yourself 3 questions. What worked? What didn't? What will I change next? This short check-in forces your brain to examine its own patterns and extract lessons that would otherwise evaporate. It prevents blind repetition of ineffective methods and increases your readiness to adapt. Over time, metacognition becomes an internal coach that guides your learning without external input. Feedback is also an unavoidable lever, but not all feedback is equal. You want feedback that is corrective and specific, not vague praise. Good job doesn't change circuits. Your grip is too loose, your argument lacks structure, or your timing is late by half a second, gives your brain a precise target. Ask for 1 correction and 1 concrete next step. Then immediately apply that step in your next attempt. The pairing of feedback and immediate action is what produces rapid refinement. The next lever is controlling difficulty. Learning happens in the zone where challenge slightly exceeds skill. If a task is too easy, it doesn't generate the error signals plasticity depends on. If it's too hard, the brain floods with stress and shuts down adaptive learning. You want to operate in the middle, the space where you fail 15-30% of the time. In this range, mistakes are informative without being overwhelming. You are close enough to competence to stay motivated, but far enough from mastery to generate meaningful adaptation. One practical method is to end each session by choosing one element of the task to increase in difficulty the next day. Not everything at once, just one calibrated notch upward. Another immediate lever is variability. Repetition alone can lead to autopilot. But variation, practicing the same skill in different contexts, tempos, or sequences, strengthens the underlying circuits more broadly. It forces the brain to generalize, not memorize. Instead of practicing one exact scenario over and over, introduce slight variations, different angles, different constraints, different conditions. This keeps your brain engaged and prevents stagnation. Rest is also a crucial lever, though often underestimated. Short rest intervals during practice help the brain consolidate micro patterns. Longer rest, especially sleep, transforms fragile, newly formed connections into stable networks. Even a 20-minute break with eyes closed can significantly improve retention after a demanding session. Rest is not the absence of training, it is part of the training. Finally, accountability amplifies every other lever. It doesn't need to be public. It can be a simple nightly check-in with yourself or a partner. Did you complete the practice block? Did you adjust based on mistakes? Did you seek feedback? Accountability keeps behavior aligned with intention and prevents mindset from remaining purely theoretical. When combined, these levers create a system, one that takes your willingness to grow and channels it into the exact neural processes that drive learning. They make improvement not a matter of luck or talent, but of structure, a structure you can begin implementing today. So here's the action item before you leave tonight. Pick one skill, schedule 2 25-minute practice blocks for tomorrow with a single process goal, and write one testable hypothesis about what you'll change if you fail. Do that for 2 weeks and observe how your performance curve shifts. Thank you for being precise with your attention. If you apply this framework consistently, you'll not only learn faster, you'll change how your brain learns. See you in the next video.